Hello and welcome to the EduChanger podcast, where we look at the real stories behind educational transformation. My name is Bronwyn Lodsey and I'm a passionate educator in New South Wales, and it's my pleasure to invite you into these conversations today.
Two of the students came tied first
in
English,
in the whole of New South Wales.
Using IQTVE. It's a sentence level. It's one very important part or a building block of what goes into an essay. When people see it, they can't unsee it. But this all comes about with that explicit teaching cycle. So what you want to do is to create that collective efficacy. Light bulbs are just going off everywhere. Do I think every teacher can do it? Absolutely.
Today, we are fortunate to hear from Jane Stocks, the current Deputy Principal of North Sydney Girls and, most significantly, the developer of the IQTVE model that transformed both North Sydney boys to overtake James Ruse for the top position in New South Wales, and now the meteoric rise of North Sydney girls as their HSC English results have increased from 40% to 72% of students achieving a Band 6 in English Advanced and 86% achievement of E4 results in English Extension 1. With over 25 years of dedicated service in the New South Wales Department of Education, Jane has used her extensive expertise in education and leadership to foster enriching learning environments and empowering educators to achieve collective excellence. It is this innovative, strategic focus to achieving high-quality education that inspires lifelong learning for staff, teams and students that has brought us to this conversation today. Jane truly is an education changer, and it's a pleasure to speak with her now. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you. And what can I say after such an amazing introduction? I feel very humbled and feel very proud to be here sharing and enjoying the energy that you bring in celebrating the achievements of other people. And I think that's one of the great things about education, that we've got other people that believe in us. So thank you very much for having me and for such a very warm and encouraging introduction.
Well, we're going to dive straight into your IQTVE model that was recently reported in the Sydney Morning Herald after it transformed the North Sydney girl English results and impacted North Sydney boys. So can you please give us some insights into when and how you came up with the model, an explanation of what IQTVE means?
Yes. So the IQTVE model actually came from sitting at marking. And it was back in, and there's a few of us who will remember those days where we used to have to go and sit in old chicken sheds.
So HSC marking?
Do HSC marking, yes. Actually, I was up at Newcastle, and we were in what used to be the chicken shed when they used to have the Newcastle show. And I was studying, we were marking Module A. And when we marked Module A, I just noticed straight away that when a 20 came across your desk, you just knew straight away it was a 20. And a lot of other papers were in the weeds. And you're looking and you're thinking, is it a 15, is it a 14, is it a 17? And you're having all these discussions. And when pilot scripts would come through as well, that would often cause a big brouhaha where everybody was talking about, oh, what are we going to give this? And the noise level would kind of go up. And everybody was really happy when a 20 came, because everybody was like, it's a 20.
Yes.
It's a 20. And you just knew that it was a 20. So I was a bit of a nerd and spent my dinner times going back and looking at those 20 out of 20s in the pilot scripts and really thinking, what is it that they're doing? And I can remember just sitting there and looking at the 20s, and I thought, I can see this pattern. And when I saw the pattern, then I couldn't unsee it. And the pattern that I saw was IQTVE, which was idea, quote, technique, verb, evaluate. Now, they didn't always use it in that order, but I was seeing that students were really starting to shape and scaffold and write their responses using this idea, quote, or it might have been idea, technique, quote, verb, evaluate. And the idea was leading into what it is that they were talking about. They weren't going into this really dense, I've got an idea, I'm going to talk about it for the entire paragraph. They would take an idea and they would build on it. So they would build this tension, and it was building all the time using this IQTVE, IQTVE, IQTVE. And then sometimes they would mix it up and it would be IQTVEVE, IQTVE, ITQTQVE. And once I started seeing it, and so these are the ways that I've unpacked it, as in idea, quote, technique, verb, evaluate. They're the labels and the terms that I've given to it. And I can remember going back to class, and I did speak to you about this before, when I first started teaching it to my Year 12s back in like before 2010, the modality of my language was very much, you might want to think about using this instead of pedal or peel or teal. And I don't want to negate the effectiveness or any of those as a scaffold or using those as a teaching tool.
Sure.
But I think there is a limit and there's a cap as to how far you can actually go. And I don't think that a 20 out of 20 is using pedal, peel, or teal. A 20 out of 20 is using IQTVE. Now, I've run some samples and I've run some examples where I've actually put people there in marking and given them scripts where we've got 14s, 15s, 16s, 17s, and then there's a distinct 20. People can't agree on the rest. They're all looking at all the other papers and they're thinking, I can see the strength on here, I can see the strength on that. We've got all these papers that are in the weeds and student responses, where do we put it? Everybody agrees on the 20. And the 20, when I've shown then the IQTVE model, then when people see it, they can't unsee it. And so when you do the same for students, it starts to really demystify a lot of what they think is the subjective nature of English. That English is a very subjective subject and teachers are looking for a certain thing and it depends what marker you've got, what do you put in, how do you write it. I think when we start showing them, actually, no, it's really objective. We've got a very clear criteria. We've got standards. We've got things we're looking for. And there are certain things that we're looking for in an essay. IQTVE is one of the stepping stones that's going to help them to actually be able to achieve that, because it breaks it right down to a sentence level. Now, sometimes IQTVE can go over 2 sentences, but more often than not, it's 1, maximum 2 sentences as to how you actually want to do it. But it doesn't have to be sequential. So when you're thinking about something like pedal, peel, or teal, they need to follow that exact sequence. So with IQTVE, once you've really learned the basics of how the structure works, the more you start experimenting with it, the more you become creative with it, because you've learned the technical aspects of how it is that you're writing this sentence structure. Then you can start to really surpass and become that person who is really getting your ideas and moving them along very quickly. One of the other things I really like about IQTVE is that it allows you to make your point in 1 sentence. But quite often, even though you've made a point in 1 sentence, you haven't finished that point. But instead of then thinking, okay, well, I need to analyze a little further, I need to do something else, I'm going to elaborate my point and I'm going to bring in some more evidence and I'm going to bring in another verb and I'm going to bring in another technical aspect in order to keep on developing that idea or that concept where I'm building it all the time. And if you look at the Band 6 descriptors for English, it is extensive. It's talking about having detailed, well-chosen, discerning textual examples. You can't achieve that with pedal, peel, and teal. You need to be having evidence after evidence after evidence after evidence. And IQTV encourages you to do that. So I like to think of it sometimes as a bit of a recipe. These are the ingredients that you need to have in your response in order to be achieving an A. Of course, even though you're following the structure of IQTVE, when you get to the E, sometimes you're going to find students who are explaining or describing and they're not actually evaluating. So then it becomes important that we make that evaluation really, really clear. You often have students who will repeat the idea and just say it a little differently in the evaluation. But that's why I think IQTVE also works really well, because it's a great diagnostic tool. Because as a teacher, you can look at that sentence and you can say straight away, great idea, you're not evaluating. And quite often when I'm marking students' work, I will take their evaluation, I'll make it the idea, and then I'll say, you think of a new evaluation now. Your evaluation's actually your idea. Put that first, make that the active part of your sentence, and then move it. And then think about something else that you want to say. But the other part of the evaluation, and if we're thinking about IQTVE as a sentence structure as opposed to something like pedal, which is a paragraph structure, and you kind of get to the link and then you've finished and you've summed it all up. IQTVE, when you get to that E, I really want to encourage students, you haven't finished saying what you need to say. So your next idea needs to build on that evaluation. And so that creates that tension where it is that you're actually building. So I hope that gives an explanation as to how it works. It's a sentence level. It's one very important part or a building block of what goes into an essay. And it's where you can break it down. And if we go back to some of the most basics of teaching, we start with chunking, modeling, explicitly scaffolding. IQTV gives you that ability to be able to do that. Instead of looking at a whole essay and thinking, how do I achieve this? This is very overwhelming. Let's start with a sentence. Let's start with a quote.
I want to zoom into that, if that's all right. I really loved what you said about demystifying English for students because as a fellow English teacher, that is something that I'm passionate about, and using the evidence to propel this unfolding idea. I've heard you describe the process of writing that co-creation or pre-preparing writing in class as quite vulnerable. Can you give us a snapshot into if we went into your classroom for a whole term, what would that look like? What are some things that we would see in terms of writing that's pre-prepared or on the board or co-created? How would that work in terms of teaching the content through this model?
I start teaching IQTVE pretty much from lesson 1. So as soon as we start the text, so I've just finished teaching Henry IV, and pretty much as soon as we started teaching Henry IV, I was like, let's start looking at some IQTVE straight away. And the reason I wanted to do that is because I wanted to break down, and it's not just a writing strategy either, because you're teaching it and you're aligning it together with the concept that you're looking at in terms of the text. So for me, I went in with Henry reflecting on last year, thinking most of the students are saying, how good, Henry bad. Yeah. And we had this really binary argument that was limiting their responses. So I thought straight away when I'm teaching Henry IV, we're coming in and we're going to look at Henry from page 1 and shape some IQTVs where we can see he is not bad. So I came in with the intention of we're going to shape some IQTVs. How can we see him as someone who is quite reflective, someone who is thinking about the tension that's happening in his kingdom? How is his language being shaped? How is Shakespeare constructing him as a character who's reflecting on what's happened in the past? What are we going to do now? How am I going to establish myself as a leader? And started looking for that evidence straight away. So IQTVE came in straight away, but it came in with a purpose that I wanted to establish. Henry does not equal bad. Henry is a very complex, nuanced leader, and how can we see that straight away? And let's start putting it into some IQTVEs. Now, I modeled 3, where I took 3, and I'll try and take really obscure quotes that they won't use.
And you pre-wrote them, or
and
you wrote them on?
I pre-wrote them. And so that was for year 12 where I did that. But then their homework that night was to do one IQTVE, and then I'll give a word limit, no more than 70 words max. That is it, and that's all you can submit.
For that sentence.
That one IQTVE, where they specifically had to address the nuances of Henry's character. So it's conceptually driven as well. So I've got a purpose in mind. I'm getting them to write because there's something that I want them to achieve in their evaluations. I will often give sentence stems. I will give them verb sheets. I start by giving them verb sheets and breaking them down. I don't like the verb insinuates, no shows. We want to use high impact verbs. We want to think about what we're doing. If I was going to go back and have my time again, I would call it ITQVE, but it's too far into IQTVE now to change it. But I think quite often the most natural way to write is the idea, the technique, the quote, verb, evaluate. But now what I've started to do is to get them to bookend. I'll do the ITQTVE and I'll make them do a macro and a micro.
Sorry to pause you there. Just for people who might not know what you're meaning by macro and micro techniques, do you want to just give a quick definition?
So the macro might be the fact that Shakespeare has shaped this quite lengthy monologue for Henry to open the play, and we're thinking about opening with that monologue and the way that he's actually shaped that monologue. I would say use that as the macro, and then the micro might come down to thinking about opening in medias res, so opening right in the middle of the action. So it's something you can bring down to an actual quote, because often the macro is difficult to find the actual evidence. So you talk macro and then you lead into the quote and then you come into the micro and then it leads into the evaluation.
Yeah.
So it's thinking about it in that way. I also like doing it straight away from the beginning because I like them to talk about the composer, because one of the other really important things that goes with IQTV is this idea of stepping outside of the text. And IQTV really encourages you to do that, because in the idea Shakespeare constructs, Shakespeare portrays, Shakespeare explores, Shakespeare's characterization, Shakespeare examines. And so then you talk about an idea that they're actually examining, and it forces them to then do that instead of saying, oh, Henry says this, Henry says that. We're getting them outside of the text from the beginning and thinking about how I'm shaping an idea that Shakespeare is exploring, and then we're seeing this idea being demonstrated through something that Henry has actually said, and we've got those technical aspects as well. Now, the technique can also be a problematic one because often it becomes, let's spot a technique. What's in there? I'm going to find a simile, a metaphor. Repetition is a favorite one. Anaphora. We're going to go, oh, wow. So I often try to discourage students from using onomatopoeia or sound techniques. I mean, sibilance sometimes can be a beautiful one to use because when we think about all the S's and it creates that soundscape for us, that helps us. But when we're thinking conceptually, we want to be thinking about a technical aspect that can be really purposeful to the evaluation that you're making. So straight away, that technique becomes so valuable as well. Let the technique do some of the heavy lifting. And that's why you can even use simple technical aspects like verb or, you know, and thinking about the repetition of the verb. And then you pull it out and you make it very specific to the evaluation that you want to use. And people will say, oh, emotive language, it's so wishy-washy. Sometimes that can be some of the best technical part you can actually talk about rather than looking for something that's really highbrow, but people think this is a great technical aspect. But the emotion, if we're going back and thinking about the monologue for Henry when we open Henry IV, part 1, there is a lot of emotive language that he's using there, and he's talking about this frighted, and when we're thinking about this piece to pant, and you can look at the alliteration of the P's, but the emotive piece to pan or pan to piece, I don't think I've got the quotes exactly right. So with what I'm talking about, the emotion that we're getting from putting those words together, I think can be more powerful than the two P's. The repetition of the P's don't make me suddenly think, oh, I'm very tired. But when we talk about the emotive aspect of what he's saying, we're really getting a sense of his ability as a leader to have empathy for what it is and the country that he's ruling and he's leading in the best way forward. If that makes sense. Yes.
It makes sense. It's actually, in some ways, about finding the most meaningful evidence and the most meaningful way to articulate what has occurred in the text as a complex and nuanced idea that evolves over time throughout the essay.
And can I come back to one of the questions that you asked was if I was thinking of, and I was following you for a term, like what would it look like? I start very purposely from the beginning knowing what the end point is going to be.
Yes.
So I know that we're going to be writing a critical response, and in this instance, it's a critical response about Henry IV and thinking about the ways that Shakespeare has represented or shaped these complex, nuanced characters in order to explore all of these particular ideas. And we're thinking about the resonance and the integrity of the text and how all the pieces actually work together. So I'm coming already from the beginning with my angle. So when I'm getting them to write IQTVEs or I'm modeling IQTVEs for them, I'm shaping them under questions that I want them to be thinking about that are going to build a structured response towards the end. So last year, for example, we really got them talking about political acumen and statecraft and thinking about some of these other bigger terms, moving away from the idea of honor. So we think conceptually, what is it we want them to talk about? So find as examples, how can we see someone using their rhetoric in a way that shows that their political acumen or their statecraft is something that we either respond to in a positive way, or we find something a little bit disarming, or we're a little bit thinking this is a myopic view if we're thinking about someone like Hotspur, for example, or Falstaff with his hyperbolic Bhakti Carnivalesque, and people will say, oh my gosh, what are you talking about, the Bhakti Carnivalesque and the play extempore? But when you start talking about it in normal terms, and this is what's actually happening, it starts to become part of the rhetoric that the students are referring to. And you were going to ask a question?
No, and again, it's demystifying, it's giving that structure to complex thought. So rather than just a discussion about the different representations that are being constructed and the reasons why, you're saying when we unpack it through IQTVE, you can see how to write about it, but also it helps you to think in that way.
Yep. And if you're looking for macro devices, you're going to go for the Bakhtian Carnivalesque. You're going to go looking for the play extempore. You're going to start thinking about the bigger aspects, which is kind of like putting chopped vegetables into your food because you want them talking about form. And straight away, macro is giving you form. And so a lot of the time students will panic and they'll say, oh, what if we get a form question? Well, basically everything that's in a play is form. So a simile will still count because it's in the play. But if we want to go bigger, then you're starting to think about, you want to move past soliloquies, but some of the other aspects as well.
So then coming back to this idea of vulnerability, just unpack for us a little bit more how this model does make a teacher have to be a little bit vulnerable in the process of walking through a text.
Yes. And one of the questions that you asked previously, which I didn't address, is that co-creation, because I have actually, and I do that in class as well, and there is that vulnerability that you're co-creating with students. And quite often when you first start talking about idea, quote, technique, verb, evaluate, students want to see it actually in action. And so I will say to students, okay, pick a quote for me. So they pick a quote and then I'll put it on the board and I'll say, okay, tell me what concept do you want to talk about? And then I'll turn it into an IQTVE and I'll just write it on the board for them. And then I'll say to them, critique it. What's not right about it? What don't you like? What could we fix? What could be better? Oh, I'm a little bit retelling here. I'm descriptive here. They can be amazing critics. They can totally pull apart stuff. Like I've given them 20 out of 20s and they're like, oh, this isn't so great. And I go, well, I can't wait to see how amazing yours is going to be. But they can be very critical. And so you have to be vulnerable when you're actually doing it and putting it on the board, because we do the same to them. So all feedback is good feedback. And I want to take that on board. But I think showing them that you can do it and say, tell me how to make this better. And then you rub it out. And then you put in what they've said and then you rub it out and then you put something else.
And so putting yourself in the place of being a student and modeling that with them, you know,
yes.
It's almost an empathetic position as well. You're saying, I understand what this feels like. Here, let me model what I would do if I was in your position.
Yes.
And that's empowering.
You make mistakes all the time when you're writing on the board, when you're thinking. And Year 7 students love picking up, you spelled that word wrong. I totally did, because I was already thinking about the next word. Thank you so much for picking that up and I'm going to come back and fix it. But then you're also teaching them that you can fix something on the page. You can't fix nothing on the page. And that's writing is this constant process of editing, rewriting, rethinking. How can I come back and do this again? But one of the other things that I think with the idea of being vulnerable is actually saying to students that writing is really hard. One of the hardest things we're going to ask you to do is to be able to turn all of your knowledge into a really precise, succinct answer to a question. And you're going to be able to write this often in timed conditions. And then we're going to be assessing you. And this is how you demonstrate your understanding. So it can make perfect sense in their heads and they can have a great understanding about it. But if they don't know how to actually write it and put it on the page, it makes it very tricky. And I think when we tell them this is really hard, I find it hard. And I've been teaching for 25 years. And so often when I'm doing timed writing activities with the students, and I love doing it right before an assessment task, but like we'll have 6, and it makes me sound like such a nerd, but we'll have 6 unseen questions. And then they've got 5 minutes to write an introduction to each one. And I'll write an introduction at the same time. And then I give them my introductions. Oh, here you go. You can have mine. And they're all like scanning.
That's a favorite method of mine in my class, yes. So that's why I'm smiling.
5 minutes it just flies by. And I actually say to them, I'm being generous because in the HSC you've got 3. Really, you want to get your intro in 3 minutes. Get it done. It's like you're writing really fast and actually doing it. But that vulnerability, I think, of actually doing it and then showing the students what you've written is one of the best things you can do, because part of that vulnerability then is that you think cognitively about your process and you get to share that with your students. When I was writing this, I found this part really hard. So then I went back and I thought about this. So then I went back and I looked at my quote. I got my text back out. I started writing this approach and I thought I wanted to argue this and I realized I couldn't take it anywhere, so I deleted it and I moved on to something else. Or I thought, no, this doesn't fit here. This doesn't work in this paragraph. And I also tell them that even though I'm thinking about structuring something a particular way today, tomorrow I might do it differently. So there's not one right answer. So even though I'm modeling and co-creating and showing them IQTVEs, or they'll say, how would you answer this question, or what order, or how would you approach it? And we'll come back just because we're talking about Henry. And they were like, how do I write about all these characters? I've got a 3-body paragraph. I've got 4 characters who I want to talk about. What's the best way to approach writing this? So I'll say to them, well, today I think this, but ask me tomorrow and I might have a different approach. There isn't one way. So talking all the time about the big picture and thinking about that process of what's the angle and where am I going, I think is also a good part. And I think the other thing is showing the students that you look at the question and all the time you're thinking about, how am I going to solve this riddle? How am I going to solve this puzzle? What is it that the task is actually asking me to do? And then my writing actually has to do that. So when you are vulnerable and you show them that process. So if we go back to doing the introduction example, I was working in class and one of the questions that I gave to them was quite a hard one. And I wrote the introduction and then the timer went off. And I said straight away when I got to the end of that introduction, I thought I haven't addressed this part of the question. Now, then I went through the cognitive process with them. I said, I'm not going to cross out my introduction and start writing again. I'm just going to make sure that my topic sentence now addresses that part of the question, because as I'm writing, I'm thinking about what the question is asking me to do. And I know that writing is a process. And so we don't cross things out. We don't do little stars and go to here, go to there. We just think, okay, how am I now going to weave this into what I'm doing next with what I'm doing? So all the time you're just talking about that cognitive process. A lot of teachers will find it vulnerable because they don't know themselves about what the steps are. And that's where IQTVE can be a great teaching tool and a great teaching strategy. And you can practice actually doing that. I've had teachers who have said, okay, love IQTVE. They've come to the workshops. They're doing it. They bring me their IQTVEs and then I'll show them and I'll shape it and they'll say, oh, I thought it was really great. And then they'll do it again and then they'll bring it and I'll make some other edits. They've actually then taken that into their classroom and showed the students.
The iteration process.
Yes. This was an IQTV that I wrote. I took it to Jane and I showed it to her. Then she made these changes and I made these other changes. And I thought my first one was really great. So this is the process that you have to go through.
Normalizing that challenge of
Normalizing
writing.
that, always editing. And I think that vulnerable process. And as soon as we recognize we're vulnerable as writers, it helps us to empathize with the students. It also changes the way we mark.
Keeping to the theme of writing is hard. It's a hard skill, and normalizing the challenge. You've worked in a range of selective schools, and I know that there might be the assumption that these students do well anyway. I want to know what you'd say to that assertion. And I guess what I most want to know is, does the IQTVE model work in a range of contexts, comprehensive high schools? Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, I want to debunk the myth that, and I will refer to alcohol in this, that people working in selective schools are just kicking back, sipping pina coladas all day because the students actually just teach themselves. Is an absolute myth. They don't. We have a different set of challenges and they often will learn content much faster than students sometimes in a comprehensive school, but then they don't know what to do with the content. So we then need to work with students, and data will tell you that HPGE students or gifted and talented students are not risk takers. They only want to do something if they know that they can do it perfectly. So trying to get them sometimes to even put pen to paper is a challenge, because if they can't do it perfectly the first time, they're not actually going to be able to do it. So there's a lot of different challenges that we deal with in a selective school. And historically, the schools that I've gone into and worked at, so if I talk about North Sydney Boys, for example, when I started at the beginning of 2019, the principal at the time, Robin Hughes, who is an amazing principal and backed me and supported me the whole time when I was working with IQTVE, basically said, what are you going to do? The boys love maths, they love science, they're really good at maths, they're really good at science, they spend all their time doing maths and science homework. They don't like English. They think English is so subjective. They don't know how to study for English, and our results in English aren't very good. What are you going to do to change that? So the challenge for me was challenge accepted. And to me, don't like means don't understand. So it became breaking down what it was that they needed to do. So we started using IQTVE in 2019. really in English extension, because I had a small team when I first started in 2019. It was the new syllabus that had just come out. We're doing literary homelands. So there were 3 of us. And I said, let's try IQTVE. And I know we were going to look at different stats, but I think we got something like 67% E4s, which was a huge jump in Extension 1 for North Sydney boys, which then gave the buy-in for the next year when we started using IQTVE from advanced, and we used it across the board. And we started with the Year 10 group, and from the first time they came in Year 10. But part of the idea, and I've kind of gone a bit off track from the question and thinking about with the selective schools and why I know that it would work in comprehensive schools, is because everybody at a selective school is not gifted and talented in English. Most of the time they're gifted in certain areas. Some it's music, some it's science, and some of them find English very, very difficult. And the EALD, some students will speak 3 to 4 languages, and English is a language that they only speak when they come to school. And when you're at a selective school, you only can take advanced. We don't have any other courses. There's no studies, there's no ELD, there's nowhere to hide. So we have every single student sitting in English advanced. And so we need to teach strategies and structures to help those students to be able to achieve the very best that they can. And so we do use IQTVE, so it definitely buffers the tail. And so from getting the odd band 2 or band 3, and in my successful year, we didn't get a band 4, we got all band 5s and band 6s. So those students at the bottom and the tail, we were also lifting up, so showing that you can actually get there. Now, does that still work in a comprehensive school where you've got students who don't read, who don't have that vocab, who struggle to put sentences together? That's where IQTV comes in and helps, because it also gives them the vocab and it helps you to be able to teach those things, because that's the other myth, that the students at selective schools are all great readers. I'll speak to students. I'm like, what are you reading at the moment? Nothing, no time, haven't had any time to read anything. The only thing they've read is something they've been prescribed for school, and sometimes then it's the cheat notes. So they don't come ready-made with the vocab and being well read. You definitely do have some, and we do have a percentage of students who are avid readers, but I would say we have a very similar mindset with a lot of students where they're not reading and the vocab isn't there, and so we teach it. So IQTVE gives you the skills in order to use that vocabulary. And one of the other exciting things is that I've been working with some primary schools, which has been great. So I've been working with teachers who are teaching Year 5 and Year 6 how to use IQTVE, and they have said that light bulbs are just going off everywhere in these Year 5 and 6 classes. Wonderful. Because the students are like, oh, so this is how you write about English, this is how you interpret. One of the great differentiation tools that I did get from a primary school that I think is worth sharing, so if you are in a comprehensive school and you're thinking about IQTV, how can this work? They ended up team teaching. They had 2 classes coming together. They had the IQTVE group, and then they had the IQVE group. So for Year 7 group starting, because sometimes they find the technical part the hardest. So get them talking about the ideas and the concepts first, because that's the other great thing about IQTVE, because I think with a lot of things, people will start with the technique. The metaphor does this, and we don't want to give the power to the metaphor. We want to give the power to the composer and to the idea. So we want to kind of change that around. So even if you first start with your differentiation by taking the technical aspect out, getting them talking about ideas and concepts first, that's beneficial.
That's just such a perfect segue into a question that I have about whole school writing. So, more broadly, you've worked on this award-winning project, Writing with Finesse, which won the Executive Director's Recognition Award, centered around a whole school vision to improve student writing. What contributed to the success of whole school writing, and how early would you start? Would you think K to 12? Would you think 5 to 12? Talk to us about that project, Writing with Finesse, and then how you would map it across a whole school.
Okay, so I'll start with Writing with Finesse, and it was and we had an exec conference, and we were given an innovation hour where I was paired with Stuart Madrick, who was the head of HSC, and Norden Zuber, who was the head of maths. And we had to come up with some type of initiative that we would pitch to the school. something new, some new program that we could have at the school. And so between us, we thought, wouldn't it be amazing to come up with a writing initiative or a writing program that was not focused on literacy, that wasn't focused on the tail, that wasn't always thinking about how we're going to benefit the students at the bottom. Let's create something that's focused at looking at the students at the top, students who are already doing a good job, who are really solid, they're really performing and they're doing a good job. How can we make it even better? And that's where we came up with the term finesse. And we wanted to make it about finesse. So we intentionally avoid the word literacy and we focus very much on writing and thinking about that term finesse. What does finesse actually look like? And that comes back to that vulnerability question as well. That vulnerability of knowing what is finesse, what does writing with finesse actually look like, is a challenge. Now, the only way for you to do that is to look at exemplars, to look at models, and to actually have a crack at it yourself and be able to be writing and thinking, how am I pushing? How can I make this better? And every time look at something and actually make it better. So that's what we pitched. And we just pitched it as an idea of how can we come up with teaching to the top? And then when we teach to the top, we'll bring the bottom with us, instead of thinking that's how we're going to fix the tail. So that was the initiative and the innovative part. But
no, I was going to say it's really that setting the bar high, showing how it's done, and it's incredible how that has a lift in and of itself, believing that everyone, regardless of their struggles, whether they're ESL, can join that process.
Yes. And so you take people with you. And everybody's going to reach a certain point. Not everybody's going to get 20 out of 20. Some people are going to get 17. Some people are going to get 15. But it's about whatever their best is and knowing that they're performing to their best. And what their finesse looks like is going to be different to someone else's finesse. And I think
I do love that.
The idea that because, I mean, I'm an avid reader and I wish that I was an amazing and imaginative writer, but I'm really not. And so I'm constantly working on that. I still share my writing with students, but it's definitely not writing with finesse when I'm thinking about my imaginative and discursive writing. And I will share some on some of my pages so people can actually have a look. But I like to look at different ways that you can dress it up, like adding different things, like think about the MasterChef analogy. How can I make this dish a cracking dish by adding some jus or some other stuff? I like wearing makeup and putting that on your imaginative writing so we can dress it up. But when we're thinking about a whole school initiative, I think it's very subject specific. And I think one of the key aspects, so when we looked at how would we bring in writing with finesse as something that we looked at across the school, Norden had moved to another school, so Stuart Madrick and I were working on it very closely, and part of our research really came up with a very strong evidence that it has to be content specific, that writing is not something that you teach in isolation. You don't have a writing period, and I'm sorry if schools have that. I don't want to be critiquing that structure at all, because at different times you will try different things, but writing is discipline specific, and you need to teach it with the concepts and the content of what it is, and it needs to be synonymous. That needs to be going hand in hand, and that makes the teaching of writing more purposeful. So I did speak about that with my Henry essay example, where I came in straight away with a concept and a purpose, and this is what I wanted them to show me with their writing, and I modeled and I showed it, and then I got them to actually do it, and then I gave them the feedback straight away. Writing in science, writing in history, writing in geography, writing in eco, writing in legal, writing in art, it's all very different. So you need to teach to your discipline specific area. And so one of the things we did with writing with finesse was to come up with an explicit teaching cycle that could be used across all subject areas. Begins with a pretest, then becomes about explicit teaching based on what you've done with the pretest. That explicit teaching includes scaffolding, modelling, using exemplars, then incorporating feedback, feed forward, more explicit teaching. You have a formative assessment, which is part of that feedback and feed forward. But essentially when you start with your pretest and come around to the teaching cycle, you're thinking about what's the end point. So you know what your summative task is going to be. You do a pretest based on one small skill. So I'll give you an example. We did a pretest for Year 10 last year where we were looking at her story, and we were looking very much at comparing the Yellow Wallpaper, Carol Ann Duffy's poetry, and The Handmaid's Tale. And they were looking very much at the shaping of the female voice in those three texts. But we did a pretest where we just wanted them to do one IQTVE in response to a small extract from the Yellow Wallpaper. And we knew that they were writing a comparative essay at the end. And when we looked at that data from the beginning of the pretest to the end, after that explicit instruction, nothing validates a teacher more than a pie chart, which shows you the growth in the evaluation, because sometimes you don't get a lot of validation. But all the time you're strategically thinking about where is it that I want to go. And that explicit teaching cycle is what you need to be focusing on. Now, an explicit teaching cycle can be one lesson, it can be over a couple of weeks, or it can be a whole term. So it depends. Sometimes you might want to do a pretest at the very beginning, quickly teach a skill. So it could be an imaginative writing. I want to teach them how to do a piece of interiority, get them to do interiority at the beginning, teach a little bit about interiority, do an interiority at the end, collect it, one lesson. Or it could be something that you're doing across a whole term, where we're getting them to think about writing an essay and thinking about writing evaluatively using IQTVEs in a comparative form. So I think that idea, and I've kind of gone off on a bit of a tangent of the, but I'm focusing on English, but that same explicit writing structure can work in other subjects. And so the head teacher of HSC at North Sydney Girls, Michelle Kennedy, is amazing, because she's like, okay, talk to me about this explicit teaching cycle. I've explained it to her. She's like, right, I want to learn about hedging. I didn't know what hedging was. So then I started looking into hedging, and it's something that you use in modern history and ancient history, where you want to make an assertion, but you recognize that there's not 100% validity behind what it is you're saying. So you hedge, it's like hedging your bets, that you want to use language. So then we're thinking about modality. How do we use that modality? How do we shape it? Where we start shaping a sentence. So we were using hedging and modality and thinking about ways we could shape that. Head of science at North Sydney Girls, Tara Babington, amazing. We've started using because, but, so in which is a great teaching strategies taken straight from the Writing Revolution book, which is a fabulous book. I think everybody should read it. But because, but, so works so well in science, because even if you've got, and we started looking at some of the science HSC questions, and it begins with outline or describe, but then it will say the impact of. Describe the impact of. And then the students are thinking it's a describe question, but it's actually not. Because when you're describing the impact of something, you're evaluating, you're making a judgment. And so they've got caught up with the describe verb. And so if we just say to them, you just do it because, but, so. Because of this, but this, so. But then we also started thinking in science that because, but, so didn't necessarily work. So then we started adding as a result. And so we've kind of put that at the end. But this all comes about with that explicit teaching cycle, where you think, what is the skill? And the skill needs to start with a hunch. What are you noticing? When you're marking and you're looking at students' work, what's bugging you? And sometimes you can get to the end and you think, oh my gosh, I'm a terrible teacher. Why? Like, what do they hear when I speak? They've written all these things. So then you think, okay, now what is the skill that I need to teach? And then you use that skill to become the basis of that next explicit writing structure. And you come in and you actually teach it again. And then you do a pretest and you focus. And then you've actually got to break it down as to how that works. Now, that's how it works across a school. But each subject would choose something specific that they were doing. And then we started embedding it into all of the subject areas and seeing growth. Visual arts were doing some great work and had some fabulous results. And paying homage to the Selden method and the I don't know his first name, but he's from Balgowlah Boys, and he does this, doing that. And that really helps as well, because you can use that same explicit writing structure, and we use that with writing with finesse, because I think if you blend a whole lot of great writing practices together and give students a toolbox of writing skills and strategies, they can go into exams, they can go into assessments, they can look at a blank piece of paper and have a repertoire of writing strategies that they can draw from and use with their writing. And so with some subjects that this does this, doing that, like PDH, for example, works beautifully. And it really helps them to shape those complex sentences, but it comes back to the verb. And I think verbs are the key. So hopefully I've answered that question.
Yeah, beautifully. Yeah. I'm just smiling, and I'm actually learning a lot as you're speaking. So I'm really grateful for your time. Now, I want to ask you, for people who might be unsure or skeptical, can any teacher or school achieve writing growth through IQTVE or subject-specific models?
Absolutely. I think that if you aren't teaching writing you're missing out on one of the most fundamental aspects of what it is you need to be doing as a teacher. Because one of the things that students will often have is all the content and all the knowledge in their head, and they know everything, but they just don't know how to put it on the page. It's part of our core business to show them how to actually answer a question. So not teaching them writing is missing a key skill. We have to embrace the idea of us being writers first. And so one of the things that IQTVE will do is to give you the skill set yourself to start suddenly thinking, okay, let me have a crack at writing an IQTVE. Let me have a go at doing this. And then when you start doing it, it starts, I find it addictive. I'm a bit of a nerd. Other people may not find it as addictive. But when you start thinking about, how would I answer that question? How would I do that question? How would I answer and write that question? It starts to become a core component of what it is with what it is that you're teaching. Does that mean that you may have to go back to basics and start thinking about your vocab, your writing, and your skill set and the way that you teach? It might mean that. And I think that's good to be a reflective practitioner, to be doing that. Do I think every teacher can do it? Absolutely. They've all gone to uni. They've all written the essays. They've all proven that they can actually write. But writing those specifics and thinking about the basics is something that comes from reflection and practice and really honing and wanting to make that craft or that aspect of being able to demonstrate your understanding and demonstrate your knowledge, a key aspect of what we're showing our students how to do. And that writing is the key component to that. So I absolutely believe that it's the essence of what we do. And I think we should start doing it from lesson 1, and it should be taught synonymously with the content.
We're about to move into the challenging part, which is I want to talk about the criticism. I want to talk about when you pioneer a methodology, and you've been so good at recognizing sources that have helped and influenced you, but what would you say to the criticism that IQTVE is formulaic, that schools already do this, that it doesn't promote autonomous thought?
Well, if schools are already doing it, fantastic. I think that's amazing that people are out there and they've nailed it and they've got something that's actually working for them. And I think that is really great. I really disagree quite firmly with the idea of it being formulaic. I think it's looking at what are the key aspects and what are the qualities of good writing. And I think to take away this idea that there are technical aspects to writing that you need to have in a good piece of writing is doing a disservice to our subject and to us as a discipline, because it is a very technical subject. So I'm not talking about techniques at this particular point, but writing is very technical. So if we think we're going to immerse people and put them into a beanbag and they're suddenly going to be able to write a novel and become great imaginative writers, I think it is doing a disservice to our subject, because it is a very technical discipline and there are certain aspects and skills and things that you actually need to be doing. And so I think if we don't teach the students what those skills are and what those strategies are or what those aspects are, and tell them and show them and model for them how to actually put it into their writing, then it becomes problematic, because that's when they start thinking it's very subjective. I'm doing everything you're saying. I'm repeating what you're doing. They'll be writing a lovely recount or a commentary, not putting that evaluation in. So we're looking at the end saying there's no evaluation here, but when have we taught them to evaluate? So I think if we've got it as part of our marking criteria and we've got all these aspects there, why aren't we giving them the tools and the strategies in order to actually do that? So one of the things with IQTVE is that instead of it being a formula where you think I need to follow IQTVE, 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 you can, and you probably still can get quite a solid mark by doing IQTVE, because I have actually experimented and tried it for myself. But as with any discipline, once you know the basics and once you've got the skills, then you start experimenting, and that's when the creativity comes in. So the formula then becomes the basis or the theory for you then to take it and to be able to become that very skilled person who's able to use those techniques quite confidently. And I like to use artists and if you go to museums, you will see uni art students actually sitting there painting and copying the great works from the museums, and you see them there all the time. They're learning the brush strokes, they're learning the techniques, they're learning how do I actually make this. Once you've learned the basics, then you can experiment. But you can't experiment and you can't be creative and you can't be doing all of those things where you're being innovative if you haven't actually learned the skills first. So my idea with IQTV is I'm giving you the basics, I'm giving you the skills, I'm taking away the demystifying idea of English and saying this is what actually comes in for you. But I'm giving you a sentence structure that can work, but then you can move the parts around. The only time you're really going to fall into trouble is if you start leaving parts out. And it's kind of like making bread. You know, there's certain ingredients, if you don't put them in, it's not bread anymore. It's not going to actually be what it is that you want to be shaping. So an English essay to say is not formulaic or doesn't need certain aspects in there is also a little bit problematic, because that's not saying that there is one formula, you need to follow this actual formula all the way through. But there are definitely skills, traits, attributes, qualities that we are looking for in a Band 6 essay. And if we don't tell students what they are, it starts to become a hidden curriculum. So we've got to show them the way. So there has been some criticism that this is disappointing, we're moving away from what English should be, that it should just be this free-spirited thing that students should just by some form of osmosis know how to write and be able to put this into a skilled essay. And I think that is not my way of thinking of teaching, but if that is your way and it is working for you, I wish you well and continue with that path. But for me, I find that students, and I work with some of the top students, and last year they came first. 2 of the students came tied first in English.
In the whole of New South Wales.
Using IQTVE, and they started with using IQTVE. Now that's not a formulaic, memorized response. This is showing students this is the skill set,
the scaffold.
This is a scaffold you can use. Thank you, that's the perfect word. It's a beautiful scaffold that you can use. You can hang your ideas, but there's so much room with the IQTVE for their vocab, for their meta language, for their conceptual, insightful, perceptive understandings, interpretations, theoretical understandings to all slot in, because the I and the E gives you so much space to talk about different things. And so you can start with looking at an IQTV, then you can start bringing in some macro techniques, then you can start bringing in context, then you can start bringing in theory. And I think when you start showing them how you can take this really basic, what looks like a formula, oh, this is very simple, we're already doing this, this is what we're already doing. And then you really start to break it down, you think, is it really what we're doing? Is it giving the room and the scope for what students need to do? And one of the things that I found, and having done this for many years and working with students who are achieving amazing results, and I'm going to put it down to the students because they're the ones who are doing it. I'm really giving them the tools. I'm the facilitator who's actually showing them. I think one of the things that we can see is that it gives them the room to then be insightful and perceptive. Whereas before they didn't know where do I start, how do I structure. So I'm giving them that point. And so I deal with the criticism. I'm going to throw in some Mel Robbins, let them.
And I agree.
And then let me.
Yeah. And, you know, a huge reason why I was so keen for you to come on the podcast, Jane, is because I am an education nerd and I love to look at the data, and I can see that the method that you're employing has real gains that can't be explained in any other way, are undeniable. And also generously, for the way that you're being generous to people out there. You know, when I reached out to you, you don't know me, and yet you're willing to share the things that you've learnt with other educators. Yeah, that's a really generous thing to do.
I think that is twofold, because I think you have to be also open and generous to want to know and hear what other people have to say. Because I think sometimes as teachers we think, I know what I'm doing. I've learned everything I need to learn. I'm a teacher. I've been doing this for years and I know what it is that I want to do. And so for people like you, that generosity is 2 ways, because it's that you're generous enough to say, I want to know more. What else can I learn from you? What is it that you can show me? And I've learned a lot from listening to you and having that validating process and putting those ideas together. And I think when teachers collaborate and they recognize, okay, here's a system and I can take a piece from here and I can take a piece from here and I can take a piece from here and I can shape it into what I want it to look like in my classroom, it's not a formula anymore. it starts to become someone who's hungry and reflective and constantly thinking, what can I do to make my practice stronger? What is it I can learn from other people? What's working for them? I like this part. I don't necessarily like this part, but I'll blend these parts together. And I know we were talking about the data, and so last year there are people that think this is a formulaic approach, that it is only good for students who don't really know what they're doing. So it flips, I think, the criticism. People can't make up their mind whether it's, oh, this only works because it's a selective school. You could be doing anything and they'd be doing well, to, oh, this is only going to support students who are at the bottom in order to get better. But last year, so I do wanted to have like I'll have a brag moment where I talk about it, because when I came into North Sydney Girls, I was so fortunate to work with Susie Cooper, who was the head teacher of English at the time, who has now gone to Auburn Girls, and I'm sure she's doing amazing things there. She's taken the craft and doing great things. But she was so open to it. It's like, let's go, what can we do to get better? And so we changed our Module A, where they'd been doing Keats and Bright Star for many, many years, not doing very well with Module A. And I said, let's change it up and let's do something different. So we went in with brand new texts, and this was the final module we did. The students had been working on IQTVE all the way through year 11. We'd prepped them. They came in, did Module A. And for Module A, we got 46 20 out of 20s. So that's suggesting to me that this isn't a strategy that works for students at the bottom, because we know what a 20 out of 20 looks like. Module A is probably one of the hardest modules to get a 20 when we think about the advanced course and what they actually need to be doing and juggling so many balls. But yeah, 46 out of 155 students got a 20 out of 20. And in the past, I think the most we've ever gotten is 4 or 5.
But that story in and of itself is demonstrating yourself as a lifelong learner, where you've come in, you've had a look, you've worked out from the RAP data, this is the module that is most problematic. And then it's taken your study and work to implement a new Module A. You know, you didn't have to, but that's what you decided to do. And that collective efficacy, working with other teachers. You know, for me in education, to be a teacher who's working with other teachers, we're all still learning. You know, that's the goal. Is it then we also generate that in our students for them to be generous and to share and to want to continue to improve.
And that's a great point, because one of the things that's really works well at NSG and at NSB, because in a selective school, the worst thing you can have is competitiveness amongst the teachers. If the students think, oh, I need that teacher, or I need that teacher, or I need that teacher in order to do well, then it starts to become toxic, and it's because it's very, very competitive. So what you want to do is to create that collective efficacy. And so as a whole faculty, we all embraced the IQTVE approach. We all were thinking about it. Everybody was open to it. They were vulnerable. They were hungry. They were doing well. We were giving samples. We were giving exemplars. The students believed in us as a faculty. Yeah. So it was a collaborative effort. It was everybody working together and shaping and thinking. And it really culminated with Module A because it was the last module. But I think the students had that strong sense of like they could trust us. And they believed in us. And I think the other thing is we're often competing against tutoring agencies.
Yes.
Tutoring companies. But we've really started to get the students believing in us. And I know it's the same at North Sydney Boys, that they believe in the English teachers, that we know what we're doing. And IQTVE is one of those tools and one of those strategies that actually does that.
And just to kind of continue in that vein, you know, this one's a bit more personal. You've been a passionate educator for, 25 years. What is it, if you were going to explain your purpose, what is it that motivates you and drives you to continue to invest in best practice?
Definitely the students. The students have to be the priority. I think students come first in everything that we do. So we're always thinking, what is the best thing we can do? Because part of the core of my teaching philosophy is if you learn how to learn, you can do anything in life. So even though I'm teaching them IQTVE, I'm still just teaching them a skill. And it's a skill and it's a practice, and you're honing and you're thinking, I'm going to practice and think about the precision and what it is I'm doing. But once you've learned how to do that, you can apply that learning capacity to anything in life. And so for me, it's the students. It's also other teachers, because I love working with educators like you who are just passionate about wanting to learn and doing the best that they can. How can we promote and work together and think about ourselves as a collective group? We do work in a system that is very stressed. A lot of people are walking away from it. They're talking about the system being broken. And I think we have too much discourse talking about the system being broken and not enough about what the solutions can actually be. So thinking about those solutions and having that is definitely key. And I've been very fortunate in my life to work with some amazing mentors who've mentored me from when I was a beginning teacher to where I am now. And so I see my role now as a deputy as someone who is mentoring other teachers and beginning teachers and building that next generation of teachers and giving them the skill set to come through. But I also need to pay homage to my husband because why he hasn't left me, I do not know. Because I'm a workaholic.
What's his name?
Sean.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you, Sean.
And his patience. Because I am so passionate about what I do, and a lot of what I have to do takes up a lot of my free time. So if it wasn't for him and his patience, that probably would have been a deal breaker very early on. So he's definitely very patient. But to me, it is that opportunity to work with and mentor that next generation of teachers who are coming through, and I want to leave the education system in really safe hands. But I also think that with IQTVE, by sharing and being generous, is that there's room, and I do believe there's room for everybody at the top and that everyone can do well. And so that is really a key focus for me.
Jane, you are someone who is changing the education landscape, probably more than you think. And I can't thank you enough for your time, your insight, your wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
I hope that conversation encouraged you like it encouraged me, that every student, without exception, can be equipped to become a good writer, that vulnerability and collaboration aren't weaknesses in our teaching practice. They're essential tools we use to truly support our students through the writing process. And perhaps most importantly, that when criticism comes our way during seasons of innovation and change, we have to learn to let it go and allow ourselves the space to finish the important work set before us. If today's episode resonated with you and you'd like to dive deeper into Jane's work, she's just launched a brand new website called Writing with Finesse, and I'd warmly encourage you to head over and take a look or to contact her directly. Before you go, make sure you join me next episode where I'll be sitting down with one of Australia's most compassionate, gifted and inspiring leaders, the wonderful mathematics teacher, Mr. Eddie Wu. You won't want to miss it.